Thank you for joining IAB There.
Good afternoon and welcome to IAB There, a regular streaming show in which we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. My name is Angelina Ang. I am the VP of Measurement with IAB's Programmatic Plus Data Center. On today's show, we are excited to speak with our special guest, Yonah Chabatura, hopefully I got that right, Chief Product Officer at the Verve Group, and where we'll be discussing privacy first and what you need to know about the evolving regulation. Let's bring him on. So as he's coming on, Yonah has 15 plus years of experience in the ad tech industry and founded the mobile monetization platform PubNative, building advertising technologies for publishers to maximize their revenues. And early in his career, he started the web development company Weibo and also held positions at AppLeft and EA. Now he's the current Chief Product Officer. Welcome, Yonah. How are you?
Thanks, Angelina. I'm very good, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, so we're here to talk about privacy. And, I know that a lot has happened, in the last couple of months. Can you just give an update from your perspective? What kind of changes have been happening in the privacy space as it relates to advertising?
Yeah, so we're on an interesting trend, right? I would say recently, but also not that recently, right? It started maybe a few years ago with GDPR and CCPA. Well, even before that, with third-party cookies being deprecated is some of the browsers, right? Firefox and Safari. So we're actually on a path towards a privacy-first ecosystem in terms of advertising. And more recently, we've seen platforms aggressively moving into that direction. More recently, I mean, Apple, which let's say started deprecating the IDFA, or at least announcing it last year, but in actuality, they only pressed the button in April. So we're looking at let's say two trends towards a privacy first future. One is regulatory, coming mainly from the regulatory bodies in the Europe and US, and then we have a platform specific push towards the same trend. Yeah.
Great, and you talked a little bit about Apple, and obviously a lot of changes and announcements in the last couple of weeks around iOS 14.5 and now iOS 15. What is your opinion in terms of why is Apple, in a position to address privacy? Why are they doing it?
So they are a platform owner, right? And I think privacy became a tactic. I mean, it's a buzzword already, and it's hard for consumers to really understand privacy, right? So then it's easy for a large brand to frame it in a specific way that I would say favors their practices. I'm not saying it's bad practices, it's probably actually good practices, and I think something our industry should do. Is the way they execute towards it. It's maybe a bit disingenuous, right? In terms of how they push the industry into that. But yeah, as a platform owner, they find it as a USP. They had it as a USP for a long time, the privacy first approach, or the privacy part of their ecosystem, and they are just holding true to their core, so to speak, right? So yeah, the only challenging part is how they push those changes towards the industry, right? And what I mean by that is they don't necessarily, how do you say, engaging in collaboration, right? And talking to the industry participants, they just push the changes. They did delay it to their benefit, but nothing really changed within this, 9 months where they delayed it, because it's really a paradigm shift in terms of how advertising has been done before, and it is being done now, right? So that's one part. The other part is, okay, they brought the SKI network, which is, well, brings some trade-offs, but brings privacy and still brings some sort of way to run advertising and get some measurement, right? But it's by no means perfect. And yes, they are iterating already, which is a good sign, but they're iterating very slowly, which means first they understand the value of advertising for their ecosystem, but they also understand how to take that value back into their Apple Ads system as these changes move along, right? So it's it's a balancing act, I would say.
But do you think that they're doing this because of consumer privacy, or are they building out their own ad platform? And so is it benefiting them, or is it benefiting the consumer?
I think it's both, right? I think it's one under the guise of the other, right? They have been pushing services for a couple of years, and the timing was just about right to push the IDFA out of the ecosystem and leave more or less the playing field favoring themselves, right? They more or less refavor themselves and the Apple ads. What I think they don't necessarily see, or they will see over the long term, is that by affecting the ecosystem in such a way, they might actually affect their own Apple ads. As if you have less advertising, then you have less budgets, then you have less budgets to invest across platforms, not just in your Apple ads. And yes, those ads are effective and they are a bit favored in terms of the data you get from Apple ads versus SK ad network. But they have other challenges there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked a little about Apple's iOS 14.5 changes. Let's shift a little bit over to Google Privacy Sandbox, right? So the day we're recording this, Google announced that they are extending Privacy Sandbox for another 2 years. So releasing it officially out in 2023. Were you surprised by this?
Not that surprised, especially when last week they conceded to the UK regulatory body to wait for their approval before they release it, right? Basically,
the CMA,
green light,
right?
Yeah, the CMA. So, and that's how collaboration looks like. Of course, Google is a massive advertising business, so they would basically welcome antitrust if they would proceed in a way like Apple, right? Apple is not yet a big advertising player, though I would say after this year, they will probably be in the top 4, top 5. So yeah, Google had different cards to play, I would say. On the other hand side, Google has always been more collaborative in terms of their approach with the ecosystem. They are part of the ecosystem, right? Both on the demand and the supply side in the open, transparent ecosystem. Yes, there were some mishaps in the past, but in the end, they are moving with the ecosystem somewhat, right? They participate in auctions, they offer the inventory, not all, of course, not YouTube. But yeah, I would say it's quite characteristic from Google to delay things. I mean, think even their own products like Gmail, how long it was in beta, right? So it sounds like Google, it's okay, right? There are a lot of, even Firefox came to the discussion table, right, recently with their articles about the privacy sandbox, criticizing it, but in a constructive way, right? So that's what I would have loved to see on iOS. So yeah, I think Google is at the opposite spectrum of how to do things, right? I wouldn't say it's perfect. It's just better. Yeah.
And Flock Origin trials, I think they started out at the end of March, and there are some companies that are testing out Flocks and starting to give feedback. What is your perspective? Are we at the place where we figured it out? Are you happy with the progress that we've made, or is there still more that we have to work on?
I think there's a lot more to be done there, right? Amazon just pulled themselves out of Flock, but of course it makes sense. It's not like they would share cookies or cookie IDs with the rest of the ecosystem. So every walled garden will protect their first-party relationships. Makes total sense. I think we're very early on. I think there's a lot of value in first-party data. We should have realized that much sooner on the publisher side as well as on the advertiser side. And then in terms of cohorts and privacy first solutions, we're also testing, but we barely even started scratching the testing surface. So I don't have much more info. What's interesting is that they are open for conversation and they are open to make changes to how they proceed, right? I think that's the most important. There's a conversation and changes are happening, right? And they are constantly communicating, right? Sometimes we might not agree with what they are communicating, but they are communicating and they are engaging and participating, right? I think that's important. If I'm looking at the broader advertising ecosystem, we depend on collaboration.
Yeah, I think again, I wasn't surprised. Part of the reason why I wasn't surprised was that based on if anyone's been following some of the conversations that's happening in the W3C web advertising working group around, what they expect, how the ecosystem is going to work together. There's still a lot of work in terms of, these two trusted servers that sit between the browser and the DSPs. There's probably need to be some contracts need to be in place before we can do that. And in order to do that, we also have to have the tech industry kind of figure out how to incorporate it into their algorithms and into their process. And I think we're a long ways from there right now.
Absolutely, exactly. And that takes quite some time, right?
Yeah. So we talked about in terms of publishers and advertisers building out their first party data. There's obviously also privacy regulations that are trying to prohibit the exchange of data between parties. You know, a lot has been talked about providing a value exchange to consumers so that they feel most comfortable with providing their personal information. How do companies, in your opinion, how should they be approaching that?
So value exchange and consumer privacy, right? It's a very interesting topic. I look at it in two ways, right? There's the first part, which is informed choice, right? They need to understand what they are being offered in exchange. And I do think it's hard for them to understand how to share data with 100 third parties, right? So that's why I think first party data, really important. If you can do matching in a privacy first way, maybe on device, probably fine, yeah? Sort of how Apple looks at it. That's one part. But then the other part is forced privacy controls, right? On the platform side, right? How can you understand from 150 characters in a font of like, 2 bullets, what privacy is about when you read an Apple TNCs of 60 pages? I mean, it's in privacy, it's, I would say, a harder topic than, using an iPhone, at least for users, right? So I see those two sides, and I think we need to do a bit better of aligning to explain that consumer choice. By we, I mean the open ecosystem, right? So all of us in the open, publishers, tech providers, advertisers, we haven't done such a great job. We haven't rallied together until traders pushed us last year, right? So, and even then, right? So something we should have been, I would say, rather proactive than reactive, because now we let the platforms or platform control the conversation with the user, right? So that's a spot where we don't want to be, because now they control the narrative, and we only know how much value we bring to both sides, right? Free content and also small businesses and the likes. But we lost a bit control of the conversation, so we need to up our game. I would say explaining users. So first, doing our job better with maybe not sharing data that much, figuring out which data sets to share and not to share, but then at the same time explaining to the user better what the choices really are. I think in GDPR in Europe, it's coming there, although I don't like to see a pop-up every time I visit every website, right? So we're not there yet either. We just need to do a better job. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to, in terms of what I don't want to see happen is that a bunch of different subscription models that publishers offer, right? I think there's an opportunity for some subscription, but it can't be the end all and be all. And there needs to be a balance between free content and paid content.
Exactly, and it should be user choice, right? You might want to pay for some content, you might want to see ads for some content, and you might not want to give your data in some website that you don't trust. That's absolutely fine. There should be choice, and it should be informed, and it should not be forced, right? I think that's the spectrum, and I see some let's say companies drawing a hard cut, and I don't think the user wins in the end, right? Because less content, less good content, right? If you don't have the right ads personalized, then your yield decreases, then you're going to invest less in the good content, and you're going to have crap content, right? And that's not, let's say, an open web we want to be part of, right? Full of crappy ads and crappy content, right? Or crappy apps. So
that's right.
Yeah, that's why I think users should be at the center, and yeah, not platforms deciding for the user what should be right or wrong. Yeah.
So I didn't ask you this in the beginning, but just in case, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Verve Group is, can you just explain what your company does and where does it play in the ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. Good point. So we are a privacy-first omni-channel platform. We are full stack, meaning that we cover the needs of the advertisers as well as the publisher. So we have a DSP as well as an SSP, as well as a first-party DMP. So we cover the full value chain, but using transparent and programmatic open standards, basically the IAB ones, as engaged in pre-bid, and also our SDK, our mobile SDK is open source. So we try to iterate as fast across the value chain to provide, let's say, solutions for challenges that both advertisers and publishers have, sometimes even together, across, I'd say, the user journey. So starting from the mobile device, personal desktop, and connected TV, and so on.
So when things like ITP rollout and Apple iOS 14.5 rolls out, and now with Google Privacy Sandbox, there's obviously a lot of work that your engineers and developers need to do. Can you talk about what are you guys talking about in those conference rooms? How are you guys kind of approaching these changes?
Yeah, so there's, I haven't calculated our privacy budget, but I can tell you it's significant. So I started working on privacy related engineering topics since GDPR came about, building a database to store user data so we can offer it if requested, right, based on consent, and remove it, of course, which wasn't necessarily the case. We're just passing data back then, but then you become a processor, and then you need to do an audit and then upgrade your system, which took us a bit of time. And then, yes, ITP, then IDFA, now Flock, which we need to test. So we're actually investing not only engineering and product work, which we invest a lot. I personally believe in a privacy-first ecosystem. So one of the things we've been building since last year, and we also patented, is this on-device cohorts solution, which is called Atom, anonymized targeting on mobile, which let's say leverages data available on the device from the app and from the ads being served to generate a segment ID to put you basically into a cohort. Yeah, but that's one of the initiatives which took us more of a year with a few of our best data scientists, a few of our best mobile developers, and so on. So that's one initiative. Of course, we always need to update TCF 1.0, TCF 2.0. So that's the other side of the spectrum, right? As we move ahead. And of course, there's Flock. So I don't have the number of engineering resources we invest into privacy first projects, but I would say it's significant. It's a significant part of our resources. Yeah.
So, you know, there's Google Chrome, there's Apple Safari, you got Android operating system, you have Mozilla, Firefox, Microsoft Edge. It doesn't seem like everyone's going in the same direction. And so there's a bit of fragmentation and diversity, I will say, in terms of how they're approaching the advertising ecosystem. What do you have to say to each of them? What would you, if you had them all in one room right now, what would be the one thing that you would tell them?
Well, let's come together. Let's find what we have in common, what we disagree on, work on what we have in common, and figure out how to get a line on our disagreements, right? Because in the end, the goal is the same. It's privacy first, right? We're all going to the same town, right? It's just we want to take a bit to the left, a bit to the right. I think we would get faster there if we pick a road and we commit to where we agree, and then where we don't disagree, we figure it out as we go. That would be my preference. I think it's starting to happen if you look at Firefox and the comments on Chrome, and also if you look at, let's say, WebKit and Microsoft and the privacy click measurement. Yeah, so it's ITP and the privacy click measurement. So it's coming. It's similar, right? It's just we're not always pushing in the same direction. We're just slightly around. Yeah, even if you look at Flock, or maybe Fledge, they have some similarities with SKA network, right? With anonymized and deferred reporting. So it's that's what I would say. Get together on what we agree. Let's do in parallel what we don't agree on.
And in terms of, I guess one of the things is around what are some of the conversations that you're having with your customers? Like, how prepared do you think that they are? Are they leaning in, or they're kind of, leaning back and just seeing what happens?
We have two types of customers, actually. So we work with mostly larger brands. So our part of the ecosystem is mostly brands, from larger to smaller brands. So we have brands that are there to embrace it and there to test whenever there's a test readiness across the full stack, right? And those are more digital brands, more digital savvy, or even digital native brands that live and breathe only within apps or within websites, right? So those are a bit faster. The larger, say Fortune 500, they need to audit first the solutions, understand better the ecosystem. So they will move a bit slower, but there's interest across the board. They understand that this is where the whole industry is going, and they understand that they need to be prepared. So I would say big and small, there's an understanding. The speed at which each moves, well, depends on their size and their internal processes. And that's also around agencies. They are very inquisitive now in terms of privacy first solutions, contextual. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest, less on the action. And I would say there's some brands that are already leveraging the current ecosystem. Think of lower CPMs and things along those lines, while the others are waiting and seeing, right? Some, by the way, are investing more into the walled gardens because more secure, so they, how to say, hedge the risk. So we've seen that part. That's on the advertiser side, right? On the publisher side, yeah, what can I say? They of course are how to say, unhappy about the current setup. They lost quite a bit of revenues. We see those coming back. What we've actually seen, so AudioMac, they released their numbers recently in terms of opt-ins. I think they were at 60%. Of course, that's a highlight, but there are other publishers who managed to explain the value exchange, which we just discussed, in a good way within just one frame that Apple allows, in a way that brings their opt-ins to 30-40%. So, and we see that actually slightly increasing. So I think as we get better at that, and the users say, hey, this is what's happening, they will get better. For example, in Europe, on the web publishers, right, consents are now at 90%, right? People kind of got it. I still think it's annoying, but users, well, yeah, maybe sometimes just click not to see it. But yeah, that's, I would say, the spectrum between advertisers, publishers, and users.
I think you're right. Like, I think it was Spotify and maybe Wall Street Journal that I had heard that the pre-prompts were focused on, please support our artists, please support our journalists. And that seems to be resonating with those users that see those ATT prompts, where everyone else is talking about personalized ads and do you allow or not allow tracking. So the story is, hey, you want this content, you need to help us fund our teams in order to provide it to you. I think that's really
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Now, one more question for you, and it's around Unified ID 2.0. I know that you and your team have been leaning in on everything, right? So you've been, you know, quite impressed in terms of, you know, how active you are and how much you're involved in. What, you know, do you see, how do you see Unified ID 2.0 playing out in the ecosystem?
So we are participating in that, of course, as you just mentioned. I don't know if we put the news out or not. So we're participating into that. And I think it's one of the most important initiatives we as an industry had. I think we should have had much more initiatives across any topic that runs across our industry. So we're leaning in for sure. Now, I have my reservation in terms of adoption, right? Looking at adoptions of an email-based identifier and user trust to use an email-based identifier. That's one thing. Then you have the challenges from Apple's new, how they call it, this email, basically random email generator, right? So it faces some headwinds, I would say. But I think as an industry and supporters, as long as you make that value exchange again explicit, yeah, I think we're probably in a good spot. And then we see where we iterate, right? Maybe first party cookies. Let's see what works and where as an ecosystem we get to be. I do think if I'm looking at Unified ID, it's an enabler for first party data, which is critical and super important. So if you're a good publisher, you should always have your relationships, right? Independently of how the privacy first ecosystem looks like, your relationship with your customer should be something you own, right? This is what we've learned, well, via Facebook, or the hard way via Facebook, Google, you know, owning those relationships. Now via Apple saying they own it. It's, I mean, there's not much of a clear sign. Hey, it's your users. You provide their delight, build a relationship, and some of them will give you that first party data. Some of them will subscribe a small portion. Some of them will give you this first party data. Some of them will watch personalized ads and be fine with that. Some will just want unpersonalized ads or even use ad block. That's fine. It's a spectrum, and we should be there for each of the consumer choice. So I'm all in for consumer choice and privacy. Again, not for forced privacy and consumer choice.
Right. Well, thank you so much for all your insights and your point of view. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing more of what comes out of Verve Group, and it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure as well. Thank you very much, Angelina.
Thank you. So To cap it off, to learn more about today's topic, please visit IAB.com, where IAB members can learn about the work of the IAB's Programmatic Plus Data Center. We have several committees and working groups focused on the changes in our industry, such as addressability, privacy, and measurement, or you can email me at angelina@iab.com. IAB There is a production of the Interactive Advertising Bureau. Our show today was produced by Connor Healy, James Linney, Joe Pilla, and Loretta Bain. I'm Angelina Eng, and thank you for watching.